Welcome to Underdog Rising with your host, Wade Posehn, where we ignite your journey from humble beginnings to greatness through inspiring tales of top executives and entrepreneurs. Welcome, everybody, to Underdog Rising. Today, we have Joe Venuti in studio. He is the VP of Sales at GMI. Joe, it is good to have you here with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot, Wade. Excited to be here.
So, Joe, if you don't mind, if you can just walk through your underdog story for us. So that means just walk through your journey from, after college to where you are today so that our listeners can better understand you.
Yeah, sure. So when I was in college, I took a part-time job with a security company, just like checking badges in the lobby of an office building. Honestly, it was bare money. I never thought it would amount to anything other than a couple bucks in my pocket. When I was leaving school, when I graduated, I said to my boss, like, hey, I'm going to go find a real job. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go find one of those. And he's like, well, we got a full-time job, like Monday to Friday days. It's a little more money. Why don't you do that while you're looking? I said, okay. And then they came back and made me like a supervisor. And then they needed like an assistant manager. And then they needed an account manager. And before I knew it, like I had been with them for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, probably 7 years at this point. And they approached me with a really large opportunity to go and run the global safety and security program for a biofarm company out of Cambridge, Mass. So I went, I interviewed, got the position, and ended up with Securitas for a total of 11 years. Um, when I left Securitas, there was, the biofarm companies were really, really struggling. Big layoffs, and obviously we were contractors, so we were impacted. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I never thought about a world where I wasn't working for them. It was the kind of company, and I think just the timing of how everything was, like people would go to a company like Securitas and be there for 25, 30 years. Like it was their whole career. So it never crossed my mind I may have to go do something else. And then all of a sudden, I mean, call it naive, and it was. I was out of a job. I was stunned. So that weekend, I went and played in a poker tournament just for fun. And I ended up winning the tournament, and it led to me qualifying for this televised tournament. Ended up doing well in the televised tournament. Long story short, I ended up getting a small sponsorship and played poker for 2 years. So that was my big career move. That's how I adjusted to being laid off. My parents were thrilled with that decision. Um, and then, after a couple of years, the government shut down all of the poker websites. So once again, I thought I probably have to find like a real job again. And I had a buddy who worked for a outsourced appointment setting company, and he's like, "You'd be good at this. Like, all you do is talk, and you'll be fine." So I interviewed with no experience, no idea what I was walking into. Um, Went through training. I got on the phones. I think it was maybe the fifth or sixth dial I made, and like this was really smile and dial, like 180 calls a day, no email, no social, none of that. Just dial, dial, dial. um, First, I don't know, 15 minutes on the phone, I book an appointment, the first one in my training class. So I'm like, this job's easy. Why didn't I do this, forever? Turns out it wasn't that easy. I didn't book another appointment for like a month. I was pretty sure out of the 200 or so sales reps in the company, I was definitely the worst. Um, After 3 months there, I actually said to my manager, "Are you going to fire me? Like, I'm terrible at this." She's like, "We're not going to fire you, but I'm glad you recognize it has to get better." And I think like this is where things turned. And it's funny, I was on a different podcast about, I don't know, a month ago, and told a part of this story. I went home that night, and it was December. It was near Christmas time, and I thought like, what am I going to do? Right? I'm 30 years old. I don't really have a career. Like I'm starting at scratch. I am terrible at the job I'm doing. I don't know what the heck it is that I want to do. Like I need to figure something out. And I ended up talking to the absolute top performing sales rep on the team. He was fortunately worked for the same manager, we're on the same sales team. And I just started like listening and emulating the things that he was doing. Right. I think like my exact line to him was like, "Hey Carlo, listen, you've been doing this forever. I know that you're amazing at this job, but there's no way you're 700% better than me." But that is what the dashboards would tell you. Um, and he really kind of took me under his wing. He knew I wanted to succeed, and before I knew it, it was me and Carlo and a few other guys kind of chasing it out for the top spot every single month. It just really turned like at the drop of a dime. Once I cracked the code of like, what is he doing differently than I am? And it was only small little things, but they made a world of difference. Um, I went from 20% a quota to 200% a quota, and then eventually became a manager. And that's actually the company that I moved to Arizona with, and it really jump started my whole career.
That is exceptional. I think there's so many little underdog nuances within that story. So I really appreciate you sharing that, though, and a question that stems from that that's very, very interesting is what motivated you to take that step out and become more bullish and want to achieve more?
I think a big thing is like I'm competitive by nature. I mean, I hate losing. I probably hate losing more than I like winning. And to look at a dashboard day after day, and we had the big whiteboard in the office. Everyone put how they did for the day, and to see like just zeros next to my name, it was infuriating. So I think that it was just like my own like intrinsic motivation. I was like, there's no way. Like I wasn't going to let myself go down without a fight. I knew there was a real chance I was never going to figure this sales thing out. Um, but if that was how it was going to go, it wasn't going to be because I threw in the towel, right? I mean, I would drive to work every morning for a while and think to myself, like, why the hell am I doing this? Like, this is cruel and unusual punishment. This is going to be torture for the next 8 hours. And then, a year later, I'm making that same drive, thinking, think I could book 7 today. Like, it's amazing how it once it clicks, it clicks. But to answer your question, I think it was just I refused to lose. I didn't want to be terrible at that job. I didn't want to get fired. But it was more just looking at the stack rank, man, and like bottom 2 or 3 and everything. Other than activity, my activity's through the roof because I'm trying, but the results were zero, and it was a frustrating couple of months for sure.
And then what were some of those key fundamental elements that you had to implement in order to step up your game and start achieving those results that ultimately helped you step into a different mindset?
Yeah, it was a couple of things. My organization was off. I was not leveraging any data. Like the biggest thing in the moment, I felt like he had unlocked a cheat code, right? Like he had showed me how to run some reports. And what I realized the big difference is now, I don't know, 15, 18 years later, after managing thousands of salespeople and sales teams, I did not have a repeatable process. I was coming in, I was doing what they said, which was make 180 dials a day and, pitch whatever project I was working on. I was doing that. I was doing the job, but I was only doing the job. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't owning my book of business. I was not organized. And then there were some intricacies about, how to pitch and how to talk. And, I think like the big thing is say it like you mean it. I mean, the one project I worked on, and it's still a company that's around, so I won't say who, I probably set about 1,000 meetings for them in a 12-month period. To this day, I couldn't tell you what they do. But I had this pitch. One of the account executive I worked with, he gave me this pitch, and I said it like I meant it. And that's a big part of it is being confident and understanding that a lot of times it's how you say it, not what you're saying. But to actually really like dive deep into what this company did and how it worked, like it was way over my head at the time from a technical aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's very important element that you touch on, is that confidence piece. I think the younger generation today, they might think I've got to go in, I've got to know every little nuance about the product, but that's not necessarily the case. Like you can still go in and be a top performer with that confidence, right? And then over time, you can understand that product knowledge and sell a lot better as well, which will obviously help you out at the end.
For sure. And this was a BDR role, right? I mean, I was just setting appointments and then we were passing them off to the client. But I can 100% remember going from sitting in my cube, hearing the phone ring, thinking, please don't answer, to every single time I heard somebody pick up the phone, I was like, commission. Like there was no way I wasn't getting that meeting. And that's that was the mindset from I'm going to work today and there's no way I can book a meeting to I dare you to answer because I'm going to get paid.
I love that. I think that is so great. Like that mental shift, like to your point earlier, you were in that mental mindset, right? But it was just that day-to-day process that you developed and you increased in order to help you achieve those goals, which is just so phenomenal. Do you think that having spent time in a BDR role definitely helped you in your career trajectory? Because that's some way some folks might have to start out this day and age.
Oh, absolutely. For me personally, for a multitude of reasons. I was with that appointment setting company for about 6 years between Boston and Arizona, and then I took a director of sales role with a startup out here in Arizona. That's when I left that first company, and then they came to me as we were scaling really really quickly and said, "Hey, nobody really understands top of funnel." Because remember, once I was done setting appointments, I managed a team. Then I came out to Arizona and ran like a really large team out here. So they came to me and said, "No one understands top of funnel. We're going to give you a raise and a promotion, but we only want you to run sales dev for us." And that started with me recruiting like sales reps from my couch and ended with me having 75 people getting promoted twice. I had a director, 7 managers, and like 6 teams over 3 years. So if I had never set appointments for those 6 years and never managed in that company, it never would have opened that door for me. And I know that was like a very like right time, right place situation for me. But I look at my sales floor now. So many of the people I've hired here at GMI, I hired as BDRs at Sendoso, which was the company where we scaled and grew together. Prom, 6 of them, 7 of them were BDRs for me at Sendoso. And now they're account executives here. And a lot of them got promoted along the way. And just as it turned out, they were on the market or looking to make a job change. So, I've hired a lot of them again. And then they're really, really great sellers. But I think they would tell you too, being able to set their own appointments, understanding top of funnel is a huge advantage, especially for a company that doesn't have a BDR team. Or if you're the account executive that gets stuck with the weak BDR, right? Everyone loves to complain about marketing and demand gen and sales dev, right? None of it's good enough for you. If you have the ability to go in and set your own appointments, you don't need any of that. If you're crippled by the fact that you think the supporting cast isn't good enough, it's time to take a look inside and create your own top of funnel. And if you don't have that skill set, you've never been a BDR, it's really, really difficult to do. So to answer your question, I absolutely think it's a benefit having been a successful BDR as that you start to climb the ranks in sales.
So powerful because that is correct, right? And I think in that position, younger, especially for listeners today, if they go into those roles, they'll learn a lot of experience, a lot of hands-on initiatives that can potentially be guided by those above them that they want to step into those roles. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then just kind of in that same vein, what do you look for in a new hire when you're looking to bring them on board, whether it be a BDR or say an AE?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some similarities that I look for. I'm confident because I've done pretty much every job you can do. I'm confident that I can provide a lot of support, and I'm confident like I've hired the right people around me to train and coach and mentor. But there's a couple of things that like I can't train, right? I can't train coachability. Like I can't I just can't train that. I can't train grit, right? Like it's a tough job. Like that story I just told, right? If I had no grit and no tenacity, like I would have just packed my bags and left after 3 weeks. You've got to be able to push through the tough days, weeks, and months, and come out the other side at least having learned something and stronger. And that's not an easy thing to do, and that's not something I can teach you to do. And last of all, like I can't teach you to care. If I care more than you, I've made a terrible hire. So if you can bring like grit, coachability, and motivation, I'll get you over the hump. So those are the 3 big things I look for.
And that's very impactful, for listeners today to hear because so often everyone thinks that it is always about experience. And yes, that is part of the equation, right? But having those organic, natural talents and careability is something that they need to look into, right? To have a passion, because then that's where they will be able to ultimately achieve those goals. And you you sound like a phenomenal mentor to the people that you lead, right? You'll always be there for guidance and tips on how they can improve their sales process. So I would like to touch on, have you had mentors throughout your life and how impactful have they been for you?
Oh, I mean, 100%. I think as I think back throughout my career, there's been a couple that without them, I'm not sitting in this seat. 100%. Obviously, I touched on Carlo, who he wasn't a manager. He was a peer, but he had been there for 7 years. He was the top performer, and without him kind of pointing me in the right direction, that could have been a really quick sales career, 3 or 4 months, and then that's that. But even prior to that, when I think back to my days at Securitas, um, I worked for a guy named Sean O'Dwyer for a long time. He was an account manager, and I was a supervisor. And then he got promoted to like the district level, and he's the one that made me like a real account manager. And I don't know what it is that he saw in me to this day, but he saw something, and I was young. I was probably the youngest manager there, and I had asked him one day about like, how does the business side of this work? Like, how do I get to your office someday? And he really like spent a ton of time just coaching and mentoring and counseling, and started bringing me to like district level meetings. And even though I was young, he really kind of set me up to understand like how the business side of everything works. And I learned a ton. I mean, I learned more from him about the real world than maybe anybody outside of my parents. Um, and then just throughout the years, like as I've climbed up the ranks, I've kind of had somebody that's pushed me to like the next step of my career. Right at Sendoso, I had become a director. I got hired as a director, became a senior director, and I was pushing really, really hard for VP. And as I said, at this point, I was running sales dev, so I was reporting into our CMO. It was the first time I had ever reported into marketing, and I was reluctant to do it at first. But once I met our CMO, his name's Dan Fronin. We're still really good friends. I liked him a lot right off the bat, and I said, you know what? I have no concerns if they want to shift me to marketing. Like, I think you and I will crush it together. And a few months in, I said, hey, like, I've crushed my number all these quarters in a row. Like, I'm ready to be VP. And he kind of pissed me off because he said, you got to do like these 4 or 5 things. We'll reassess it in a quarter. And I thought I was ready. Like, I couldn't believe he told me no. Um, but he did it in the right way. And he said to me in that conversation, and I didn't take it in at the moment, but 7 years later or whatever it is, I get it. He said, Joe, I can give you the title now because you've deserved it. But if I quit this company tomorrow, or if you quit this company tomorrow, I never want to see director in front of your name again. So I need to make sure you're really VP ready. He's like, so here's a couple of things I need you to do over the next quarter. And I did them. And April 1st, my phone rings. We're getting ready for company all hands. And he says, hey, he's like, you had a great quarter. Congratulations, Mr. VP. And I was like, Dan, if this is an April Fool's joke, I swear. He's like, it's not. He's like, we're announcing it at all hands. Like, you've done everything. So I mean, those are a couple, but like I learned so much from these people. Um, I mean, Dan, while we're talking about him, like I had never worked for marketing, right? I was the sales guy that was like, oh, these leads are terrible. What the hell's marketing doing? We have no brand recognition. Well, report into a CMO for a while if you're a sales leader. See the magic behind the curtain. It really changes your perspective on what goes on over there, and that's definitely made me a better seller and a better sales leader and a better go to market team partner. So yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot from a lot of people I worked for, but those three really stand out.
And I think that's very influential, because I think often at times people just they stay in their lane versus understanding what other people might be going through and experiencing, whether that's somebody that's in the same role as you, but maybe one position higher than you, or in a completely different department, but there's tends to be like a harmony between the two, right? That a synergy in order to achieve those results. So I just wanted to touch on something a little bit earlier on in your career, just so that the listeners today can have a better understanding. But, having been a security guard, that was your first job. Like, did anything from that time stay with you in your career today?
I think maybe the work ethic piece. Like when I think about like the early days with Securitas, that company, like we didn't make a lot of money. I mean, I don't know. It was 99, 2000. I think I was probably making $9 an hour. People were calling out left and right, and um, I just learned like if I showed up, like good things would happen. Right, like first of all, I'd be the one that always asked, "Hey, you want overtime? Sure. Who doesn't want time and a half?" And then it helped me form relationships with leadership, right? The managers that were in place there. Um, so I learned the value of showing up and being consistent and being dependable. I think I learned a lot more about like leadership and management once I became a manager. And as I said, Sean was my boss, and he was a great leader. When I first became a manager, I was terrible. Like I was young. I don't know that I was ready for all that got handed to me. It was a very abrupt change, and it was a request of our on-site clients. So we weren't going to tell them I wasn't ready, but it was definitely trial by fire. And I look back now, and I wouldn't have worked for me. I'll tell you that.
I appreciate I appreciate that honesty, but it is, and sometimes that's the best way to learn, right? Just be forged in the fire because you learned really quickly what not to do, and you were able to shift into what I should do and how I can focus on things. Because you'll see it, within the teams that you lead. If you're doing things incorrectly, you got to change, you got to pivot, right? Because you're the front runner, so staying in that same line of working for Securitas for a long time, you mentioned you kept getting promoted, right? Like, what did you implement to achieve that? Now obviously there might be different circumstances where they needed a position filled and they felt you were right for it, but was there anything mentally or strategically that you did to help you be the one to for them to look at?
I think the biggest thing is like I just cared about doing a good job, right? I mean, sure, like the best way to get recognized in a company like that is you pick up all the overtime, you work a lot of hours, right? Open hours, meaning a shift unfilled, is the worst thing that can happen in that world. So that was a big part of it, right? Just being a team player and helping cover when they wanted you to cover. Um, but I was always just curious. I think like I was always kind of asking questions about like how does this work, how does that work, and it was more about like the higher level management stuff, right? And the manager that I first had there, he was a good guy, um, and I would always kind of ask, and he would give me a little bit, but he knew he could depend on me if nothing else, right? And I think that like that's probably the biggest thing that I did early on to get recognized and become a supervisor and then like a manager of a small account is they knew I was dependable. They knew I cared. They knew that like things would be taken care of, and if I couldn't take care of them, their phone would ring. Right. So I had built trust with the people that I needed to, and I think like that has served me well all the way until today. I really do try to build trust with for now my CEO. We've got a great relationship. There's definitely an element of managing up. I didn't realize I was doing it early in my career, but it's critical as you move forward and report to CEOs and other executives, and they expect you to. I think for a while it was like what do you mean you're managing? They want you to manage up. It helps them too. So I think I just kind of by mistake learned how to do that well. Um, and yeah, I put myself in situations where I could get a lucky bounce. Right, there's a lot of right time, right place, but it's not all luck. Like there's a reason I was in that right place at the right time. So
Yeah, no, you've touched on it a few times. I think it's you were in the right place at the right time, but you put in the hard work, you showed up, so therefore you were the person that stayed top of mind, right? When those decisions came along. It's just like your point with like sales and marketing, right? There's a synchronicity there. Marketing is to, be consistent brand awareness, stay top of mind so that when people go to purchase, boom, you're helping assist with sales. And that's the same thing within just sort of your personal branding, if you will, while working for companies. So, what ultimately made you make the shift from security to sales? Because I know obviously, you went from the security, then that 2 year gap to where you played poker, which is very interesting. And then you shifted to sales. Was it just opportunity?
I mean, honestly, I needed a job, right? Like, so poker was fun. Poker's a great story. It was a great experience. But again, being naive in my career, what it did was it left a 2 year gap on my resume. Right? Like, I mean, I couldn't go into a job interview and be like, "Oh, I'm a professional poker player." Right? Like this thing, it just wasn't gonna help. So I started interviewing for roles with other security companies, similar to the one that I had. And they're like, "What have you been doing for the last 2 years?" Oh, I played poker. Oh, so you've just been gambling. Like, how do you recover from that in an interview? So the truth is, I took the job, the sales job, because I needed a job. Seemed like, yeah, this could be cool, right? Like I said, a friend worked there. He referred me in. He loved it. So I thought, well, we'll give this a shot. We'll see what happens. But I mean, realistically, I really needed a job. I needed to figure something out. I was 30ish with not a lot of direction.
And I appreciate that honesty and vulnerability, right? Because that's the truth of life, and I think some folks need to know that and hear that. Sometimes there's going to be elements or moments in our life where things aren't going to be perfect. But what's fascinating about that is you were able to turn lemons into lemonade. You know what I mean? You jumped into a role, you applied yourself, and look at where you are today. And I do want to touch on the element of poker because it's very interesting and it's a unique dynamic within your life where I think there could potentially be elements of, playing poker that might influence sales, just as an individual. Like, has there been anything, say, from poker, because it is something different, that might actually potentially help you within sales, because some other folks might potentially in life go through a transition like that.
I think a lot of it is mindset stuff, right? Everyone's like, "Oh, well, you must be really good at reading people." Well, if I was that good at reading people, I would have closed like $7 billion. But um, there is a little bit of that, right? The body language stuff. But I think the bigger thing is thinking about the big picture, right? When you think about poker, you if you don't play in large tournaments, you think about it in terms of, I hope I win this hand. But the fact of the matter is, this hand is very inconsequential, right? Unless I lose all of my chips. So, how do I form a strategy where I start with this amount of chips and I need to have all of these chips, 2 days later or 10 hours later, however long the tournament takes? And it's all about calculated risk, right? And that translates very much over to the sales world and to the business world. Um, we talk about like pot equity, right? If I put this many chips into this pot, how big can this pot get? What's my ROI? And that's no different than when I think about, if I put $20,000 into this sponsorship, what's my ROI? Right? Long term, how many deals can I close? Right? In poker, long term, if I show this bluff, how many people are going to bet into me later because of it? So like, those are the similarities that I find. Like, that's how my brain works, as far as like the similarities between the two, and just more of like the long-term planning versus, yeah, I can go all out, I can try to beat you in this hand. But if you've bet $5 and I've pushed 10,000 in and I have a great hand, you're going to fold and I won five when I probably should have won 5,000.
Absolutely fascinating. I appreciate you going into that because, there are, like you mentioned, there are elements where that might in turn give you an edge within sales, versus somebody else who doesn't have that experience around poker. And I know a lot of people might look at it as, oh, it's gambling, but it depends on how you view that situation and apply it. It's not about taking the exact same information and using it the exact same way within a different industry or career or role. It's about utilizing what you've learned, shifting it and molding it to how you can leverage it within your next steps within your career. So I appreciate you taking time to touch on that. And then, kind of going way back to the beginning, what motivated you to choose to study business as a major in college?
So I was not a great student. I cared more about sports than I did academics. It wasn't even close how far skewed that was. And I was convinced that I was gonna play Major League Baseball. I mean, I probably wasn't good enough, but in my brain at that time, I was convinced. Um, Junior year of high school, I tore my knee apart bad. Like, 6 surgeries. I was out of school for 6 months. They were sending like tutors to the house. So that was about the end of sports. And I kind of remember like the realization, like, well, there's not going to be any sort of scholarship. There's not going to be any college pitching. What the heck am I going to do? I don't even know if my grades are good. I don't even know if my grades are good enough to get into college. So I went to a small school in southern New Hampshire, and like I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really didn't. But I figured, like, I'm a Type A personality. I probably want to manage at some point, and um, I just kind of went the business path because I knew that in my mind at that point that could cover a lot of things. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't have a great story for you there. I think it might have been laziness and lack of direction, to be perfectly honest. Um, but I knew that I would end up in some sort of a corporate setting. So I thought that business was probably the best route to go.
And I think that's a strategic play, right? I don't think there's anything ever wrong with that. I think when we're younger, there's a lot of pressure put on people to make that decision early on. We don't know what influences are going to happen within life and where they might take us. So I appreciate you sharing that once again, because I think there are a lot of maybe potential listeners that might be in a similar position and not sure what to study, where to go. But what you've just shared is, jumping into business, look at where you are today, right? So there probably were fundamentals that assisted you with, knowledgeable elements to put you in the position where you are today, but also accompanying it with true grit and hard work. So, you know, I also wanted to, you have a very wonderful family, and I just wanted to highlight that for a second. Like, for someone who is new to their career and might have a family one day, like, do you have any advice for them on how to navigate that all?
So I have three young daughters, 7, 4, and 2. So there's quite a bit of chaos. Um, you know, I have historically been the worst person at work life balance. Just I have been. I think it goes back to like the grit and the passion and the wanting to win thing. Um, when you start having a family, when you start having kids, I think it really has to. It changed my perspective a little bit. Um, I understand that they're only little once. I only have this time with them once, and I'm fairly certain when it's all said and done, and hopefully I'm really really old, but when my life's over, I don't think that anyone's going to look back and say, "Damn, I wish Joe worked more." But I don't want my kids saying all that Dad ever did was work. Like they know I have to work, and they know that like I travel, and sometimes days are long, and my middle one, her name's Zoe. She's a lot like me, and every day, Daddy, you going to work? Yep. Can I come? No. I actually took her to the office with me last week. I had to come in just for an hour or two, and it was like the highlight of her week. But I mean, I think the big thing is, it's okay to disconnect, right? It is okay. We've all got a job to do. We're all busy. Um, but simply working 20 hours a day should not be your legacy. There are bigger things. And, I really like my job. I don't mind the hours, but, when I get home, it's time to put the phone and laptop down for a little bit and be dad. We sit down and have dinner as a family, and I do everything I can to spend time with them. Weekends, I'll sign on for a couple hours in the morning, and then we spend the most of the afternoon in the pool. So yeah, I mean, I want them to see that I work hard. I want them to have good work ethic. I want them to grow up and be contributing members of society. But I also want them to think that dad was more than just work.
Right. Yeah. I have a young daughter myself, and I think that is amazing that you touched on that, because it is true, and there's a time and a place for it. You're young, you don't have a family, you're ambitious, go for it. You can bleed work all you want, but when it gets to that time, know that. And I appreciate you sharing it, because that is a valuable piece of information. Spend time with family where you can, but it's, you identify that balance, right? And there's no problem with jumping online for work a few hours in the morning and then the rest of the day spent with family. Absolutely not. And I think that a lot of listeners can learn from that, right? Because most of them will eventually have families one day. So I really appreciate you speaking to that point. So you have been very, very diligent with the work that you have done in your career. And there's been so many moments where you've just overcome challenges, right? You applied yourself no matter what the situation was, and you surpassed it and achieved wonderful results. Did you face challenges when shifting from one industry to another, even though you were still staying within sales?
Oh, absolutely. The framework of sales, it's there, right? Um, but understanding like product market fit and message market fit and doing that into different verticals, like that's not easy, right? So I went from, selling IT to a marketing automation platform to a maintenance management software to a financial software back to IT security. So yeah, I mean it's it's a large shift. Um, I think that throughout your career, it's good to gain those different experiences. Right, I can definitely tell you that things that I learned in the SaaS world, I am now applying here in the MSP space, and it's things that not every MSP sales team is doing. And because I've hired a lot of SaaS sellers here, we're seeing success with it. So I think that it's good to kind of take what you learned in other industries and you have to tweak it, right? It's not just going to be play everywhere you go. Um, but my philosophy has always been like, don't be afraid to fail. Just fail fast and be agile. So I'm not afraid to try something as long as it makes sense within reason. Like I'm not afraid to like try a campaign and oh this didn't work. Like we're going to pivot away, right? I think that you just as a leader you can't let your ego get in the way. Just because I thought this was the best idea ever, turns out it wasn't. Let's not waste a lot of time, money, and energy on something that we've just proven isn't going to work. Let's be agile and pivot to the next thing. And then when something does work, how do you recognize that quickly and double and triple down on it?
And in that same vein, what did you struggle with the most within your sales career that listeners today can benefit from and potentially not be in the same boat?
I think some of it, right? Like when you first join a company, and I think this probably happened the most when the place I was at before I was here at GMI, it was Cube. I had never sold into finance, and you get hired in as a VP, and you're supposed to have all the answers, right? You're supposed to have this silver bullet. And I'm sitting in these meetings, like these strategy meetings, and it's acronym after acronym, and like I don't know what the hell they're talking about. And like I'm literally trying to Google some of these like financial terms. And in hindsight, I probably should have just like raised my hand and been like, "Hey, new guy question," but I didn't. I just tried to fend for myself and figure it out. And my ramp took longer than it should have. I think because of that, right? I mean, I came in through a referral, and I was supposed to be the one that was going to come in and right the ship, and um, I felt like I had to play that role, and it probably wasn't the best strategy going in. So I would say, especially when you're new, like don't be afraid to ask questions. Um, you know, Everybody else in the room is probably, at least somebody else in the room is probably wondering the same thing you are, or everybody else sitting in that room at some point in their career didn't know whatever it is you're about to ask. Just don't be so timid. I think a lot of people are timid to ask questions. They're afraid of sounding stupid. Um, I don't know. In my 43 years on this earth, I've sounded stupid plenty of times. So my theory now is what's one more. But I think like that's one of the toughest things, right? Is as you pivot, as you move, right? You're trying to adjust to a new leadership team, a new culture, a new ICP, a new everything. And then if you've totally shifted verticals, um, sometimes the jargon piece will get you too.
Yeah, and I think it's also something that corporations can have a better understanding of as well. How can they improve their onboarding process? Is there an acronym sheet? Like how can we make sure that people that are being onboarded can have access to things that will help them be absolutely successful. So, yeah, I think for listeners today, it's very important. Definitely dive in. Don't be afraid to ask questions. To Joe's point, be bullish. I think that's not being aggressive, but going after what you want and just helping yourself be successful at the end of the day. Um, Joe, I just want to thank you for spending time with us today. It's been really incredible. I just wanted to ask one last question. I know we've touched on a lot of valuable points and elements today, so thank you. But sort of in wrapping up, you know, are there any key things that listeners should know to be successful in sales as they start going out and, applying to roles or going into different industries or verticals?
I mean, I think if you're going and looking for your first sales job, be genuine. Like that's one of the biggest things, right? Anybody can sound great for 45 minutes in an interview, right? It's what you do once you hit the front door, and realize that everything you do is now part of your internal brand, right? When you're young in your career, I don't know that people really have a focus on that. Um, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel to some extent, but The people that I've hired and like I respected the most were the ones that said, Joe, like this is broken. And here's what I think we should do about it. The ones that drove me nuts were the everything sucks. Like that's not helpful. That's not constructive. But be constructive. Like come up with ideas and don't be afraid to kind of pitch those ideas to leadership. Understand they're not going to be able to implement every single thing you want. But it like for me as someone that's going to look at who am I going to promote next, the people who have that forward thinking are jumping to the top of my list because like that's a leadership quality, right? So just understand when you are day one sitting in orientation and they're scanning your license and getting ready for payroll, like you're now on the clock for what are you going to do for this company, and nobody wants to sit in the same job for 15 years. So you're starting to build your ladder, and I just don't know that people understand that on day one. But I think that's just I can tell you a lot of times in an orientation class, this person's going to be great here. This one might have been a mishire. Like I really have that gut feeling like within 5 days, and I'm probably 95% accurate with it.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, it's probably related to all the experiences that you went through because you were in that same position at one point in your life, right? So, yeah, sort of just a different question. What apps, plugins, or software do you currently use that optimize your life or make your life easier?
Chat GPT is a big one. I think I think that obviously AI is the big conversation, but even just from like a proofreading standpoint, it's hugely beneficial. And then probably the other big one, like we talked about, like work life balance and having a busy job with 100 meetings on your calendar and then trying to make practice and everything else. I do have like some family like planning apps that kind of like have like my work schedule as well as like all the kids things, so I'm able to mutually block off calendars back and forth.
That's great. I think that is it's really key because it's needed at times. And then at any given moment in time, as a salesperson, how many tabs do you have open on your screen?
Too many. Yeah, I mean to the point where all I can see is little X's. I don't even know what the tabs are anymore. I just see the X's. So however many that is.
Yeah, a ton. No, and I appreciate you answering that. Tend to ask every guest that question just because it's interesting. We live such busy lives this day and age. It's always amazing to hear how many tabs. And there's very few people that have very little tabs. It's just something the day we live in this day and age. And then Joe, do you have for sales folks any book recommendations at all? If not a book, like other resources that people can turn to gain more knowledge?
So I don't know if it's really a sales book, but I loved Extreme Ownership. I think that Jocko Willink. I think that that's just a lot. It's a lot of my personality, right? You had asked about like college and why did I choose the course that I chose, and I think I knew I wanted to be a leader, right? I think you kind of know that, right? Um, and it talks a lot about just like leading, right, and kind of owning your stuff, owning the things you're responsible for. I'm big on accountability for myself, for the team. So yeah, that's a good one. I've actually made entire not here at GMI, but we've done like book clubs with that book at former companies.
That's incredible. Yeah, no, I like to, share that with the audience and then tie it to you guys because there's just so much valuable information and so many different people have unique perspectives. We can't soak in all the knowledge, but if we can guide folks onto what to read that people have benefited from, I think that that's very important. So, Joe, I appreciate you spending your time being vulnerable, sharing your experience and advice as well with the listeners so that way they can take this knowledge and apply it to their life and just hopefully, potentially see a boost in their careers over time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Wade. It was definitely a good conversation, and thank you for having me on.